Greetings, spiritual warriors. Welcome. Welcome. I hope everyone is well and waiting for the words from our author, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. Tonight we're starting with a new volume. We'll be reading from and discussing Spiritual Warrior 4. Subtitle, Conquering the Enemies of the Mind. And if there are any new people, I welcome you to Spiritual Warriorship. And repeat that we're reading from books, the books of His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami, who gave us these concepts of spiritual warriorship to really help us do what? Help us to become grounded in understanding who we are as spiritual beings. Basically, I'm sure everyone listening now or watching this has some sense of wanting a spiritual life and feeling, understanding more about who they really are as spiritual beings. And the books are also to help us cope with life in trying times. And it's also to use the spiritual weapons of love and harmony and compassion to help us battle the tide of anxiety and depression and really feelings of hopelessness. So this is what I want to do this evening to start with our new book, Spiritual Warrior 4. I want to introduce it to you from the editor's perspective so you'll get a sense of what we're going into here. And I don't know what's happening with my throat, but I hope you're hearing me all right. Excuse me. This is from the editor's preface. The Spiritual Warrior series consists of lectures given by His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami to a wide variety of live radio and television audiences around the world. And this happened over a period of years. Now, since the topics were originally presented in spoken form, the style is conversational and informal. In the editing process, we have modified the text to enhance readability, yet sought to preserve some of the verbal nuances and maintain the mood of the original presentations. And by so doing, we hope to create an atmosphere that literally makes you part of the audience so that you can experience the powerful presence of the speaker as he shares essential nourishment for the soul. Well, after reading that, it puts a little weight on me. Now, since I'm reading and yet I'm speaking and would still want to have you experience the powerful presence of the speaker. Now, what the editors say, they would like to mention several other stylistic considerations. In the course of his discussion, B.T. Swami includes perspectives from many different spiritual philosophies. However, because his audiences are composed mainly of people in Christian and Vedic traditions, he makes the most extensive references to these scriptures. At times he uses Sanskrit terminology from the Vedas, a vast body of ancient scriptures originating from the area of the world known today as India. Now the editors state, we have endeavored to keep many of these terms and have tried to explain them within the context of the discussion. When coming upon such terms, if one needs additional information and clarification, we invite you to consult the glossary. And then they're going to give some terms that we take to for initial clarity. And I'd like to suggest, if you don't already, keep a pen and pencil pad, paper and pencil nearby. In case some word or something comes, you don't just write it down. Or if a question comes to mind, write it down, and then if I stop and ask, you can then do that. And he goes on. When His Holiness B.T. Swami refers to the one God that we all know of, he uses different terminologies. Sometimes he says the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mother, Father, God, or Krishna. And this refers to the one God that we all know. He often uses the word devotees. He is drawing attention to those spiritualists who are connected to the Vedic tradition, as well as to all aspiring spiritualists who are embarking on the spiritual journey. He also uses the term ninefold process, which refers to various activities that a person engages in during his or her spiritual practices of devotion to God, such as hearing about the Lord, speaking about the Lord, remembering Him, praying to Him, serving Him, fully surrendering, and so on. Furthermore, at the end of each chapter includes many questions and answers exchanged during the original lecture. And if you've been following along with us, some of those questions, I'm sure may have been something you had on your mind, or it clarifies what you had heard. So it says here that this book is the 4th volume of our Spiritual Warrior series. And many are already in print and have been translated into several languages, along with his other works. So the information presented in these pages are extremely, extremely rare, and we hope that you will make the most of the knowledge they contain. If you take these teachings seriously, they can transform your life into a most sublime, loving adventure. I like that, an adventure. Now, I'd also like to share the author, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. He has the preface. Let's see what he's saying here. Spiritual Warrior 4, Conquering the Enemies of the Mind, and Spiritual Warrior 5, Making the Mind Your Best Friend, were written at the same time. They are distinct books that stand on their own. But if read together, they complement each other even more than the previous books in this story. And don't forget, any of these books you can order from Krishna.com store if you don't have them in your library already. He goes on, he says about 45% of my ministry is in connection with my own Vaishnav community. Now, he puts in parentheses, by after Vaishnav, those who worship a personal God and are connected with what many refer to as the Hindu faith. So, about 45% of my ministry is in connection with my own Vaishnava communities and institutions around the world. The other 45% of my work and teaching is in connection with the international business, medical, and interfaith communities. My special area of interest involves helping leaders to be more authentic and helping spiritualists of all faiths to rise above stagnation and blocks in order to be more truly help themselves and their community. And he tells us, after recently finishing a 45-country world tour, where he addressed many of the issues in Spiritual Warrior 4 and 5, he wanted to make some of this material available in simple written form to help people overcome their anarthas, obstacles, blocks, and stagnation. He says, I saw that in all of these communities, people were getting stuck and were often experiencing intense mental suffering. As I've been praying to be more of a global change agent in assisting people with their suffering, Spiritual Warrior 4 and 5 are offered in this spirit. I know I'm ready for it. Are you? And he goes on. He says, in Sanskrit, that's the ancient Vedic language, we call the main enemies of the mind. Now, this book is called Conquering the Enemies of the Mind. And these are the ones: fear, lust, anger, greed, envy, madness, and illusion. And some of their affiliates are grief, depression, chronic anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive behavior, post-traumatic stress, and phobias. In Spiritual Warrior 4 and 5, I address and expose these enemies and show ways to overcome their influences. Their existence is engendered by the false ego, which means that transforming the false ego into the pure ego is the ultimate solution. Spiritual Warrior 4 and 5 will offer the reader different spiritual technologies for accomplishing this. Once again, spiritual warriors, here is more spiritual ammunition for you in the war of waging peace and love. So, we've got peace and love. We're going to get technologies. Let's get on the battlefield. The first chapter is entitled Avoiding Excessive Anxiety. Anybody out there with anxiety? Just a little bit? No, I am. I'd raise my hand to that. It begins with a quote from one of the Vedic scriptures, the Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th canto, 13th chapter, 29th verse. And it states, the false ego of the living entity places him in bondage and awards him exactly the opposite of what he really desires. Therefore, an intelligent person should give up his constant anxiety to enjoy material life and remain situated in the Lord, who is beyond the functions of material consciousness. Okay? Therefore, an intelligent person, which I know you all are out there, should give up his constant anxiety to enjoy material life and remain situated in the Lord, who is beyond the functions of material consciousness. First section is titled, Do Not Fear. In the ancient Vedic scripture known as Bhagavad Gita, the Lord tells Arjuna. Now again, if you've been following us, we've quoted from Bhagavad Gita many times. And again, if you do not have a copy, Krishna.com, it's on now, I believe, in an ebook. You can read it there if you're not able or have not purchased it. It's a wonderful book to have in your vocabulary. And this is what is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1866. It states, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. This is the Lord talking to Arjuna. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. Masucha. Do not fear. As the Lord ends his conversations with Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, he tells his servant not to fear or worry. And that's an important instruction for all of us. Why does he tell Arjuna to fearlessly abandon all varieties of religion and simply surrender? After describing the processes of karma yoga, hatha yoga, jnana yoga, and ashtanga yoga, the Lord basically tells Arjuna that such activities are merely prerequisites. As Arjuna ponders this knowledge, Krishna tells him to embrace the essence and abandon the superficial, secondary considerations. Accepting the Lord to be our real well-wisher, our great friend, and our ultimate protector is very profound and is the essence of spiritual life. What is the essence of spiritual life? Accepting the Lord to be our real well-wisher, our great friend, and our ultimate protector. If we just accept these facts, our worries would not have a substantial foundation to grow. Sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? But he's going to show us how we can make it easier. He goes on, among activities of eating, sleeping, mating, and fearing, the Srimad Bhagavatam, a more advanced Vedic text, describes fear as the most difficult to overcome or conquer. Why? Because of its presence in all these other engagements. Anxiety actually inhibits the positive development of love and devotion. Now, if you've been with us, you've heard all about love. Well, mostly all about love. We went through quite a bit of that in Spiritual Warrior 2. Fear and love go ill together. all activities can fit into one or two categories. Kama, which is lust, and prema, which is love. And again, hopefully you remember some of the points we brought out during our discussion of love and lust. Therefore, a devoted spiritualist needs to become doubtless and fearless. Now we've been engaging you and encouraging you towards spiritual warriorship. As you go deeper into that, he uses the word spiritualist. Remember in the other book, he kept saying spiritual warrior, Now, hopefully you've gotten those tools, those technologies. So we're talking the spiritualist. Now the spiritualist needs to become doubtless and fearless. How does a devotee on the spiritual journey acquire these qualities? And what interferes with their development? He says we hope to answer these questions by examining anxiety from psychological, social, and also spiritual perspective. The true spiritual warrior can never be captured by excessive anxiety because of his or her constant absorption in giving and receiving love. Remember when we did the School of Love, being reminded that we were spiritual beings and what the soul is made for love. And that's that part of God within us. So, the next section, anxiety minimizes the Lord's supremacy. Let's see what he says about that. As we delve deeper into this discussion and examine the great acharyas or spiritual teachers and prophets, we will find that they never took shelter of excessive anxiety or worry, which hinders the development of the devotional creeper and prevents a person from taking full shelter of God. How is that? Remember we said, if one can accept the Lord to be our real well-wisher, our great friend, and our ultimate protector, which is very profound, but it's the essence of spiritual life. So if you've gotten to that acceptance, you will not be brought down by excessive worry, because that hinders the development of your devotional creeper. Excessive worrying indicates, listen now, excessive worrying indicates that we have lost control of our mind. It means that we have not fully accepted God's love and omniscience in his ultimate position as Krishna to Bhagavan Swayam, or as the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is in control. If you followed us through the 12 qualities of a spiritual warrior, remember a number of them, he reminds us of who is the controller. In other words, he says, worrying means that a person has failed to appreciate God's position as the possessor of all 6 opulences, mainly beauty, strength, knowledge, fame, wealth, and renunciation. If you know anybody that has these qualities, they don't have it all, they only have a little. It is God's position as the possessor of it all. The person will consequently think of the Lord as unmerciful and will remain overly concerned about their personal fate. Such anxious people will begin to see themselves as the controllers and will doubt the Lord's full presence in their hearts. Anxiety minimizes our access to the Lord's constant help and guidance from generation to generation and age to age. Worrying literally minimizes our access to the potency of God in His different avatars or incarnations, who come to annihilate the miscreants, establish pure devotional service, and protect His devotees. We're told and understand in our ancient Vedic scriptures, the Lord makes His presence known and felt in this planet for just those purposes. And the main one is really to protect His devotee. The Lord loves us and takes care of us. He goes on. The Lord tells us to give up such anxiety. And He also tells us that we should engage the mind in positive activities. Remember last week we reviewed mastery of the mind. Here's another verse from Bhagavad Gita. Engage your mind. This is the Lord speaking to Arjuna, and when it says speaking to Arjuna, it's speaking to all of us. Engage your mind always in thinking of me. Become my devotee. Offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. Here again, the author is saying, the Lord, He tells us not to worry about the outcome. We might compare this verse to the previous verse in Bhagavad Gita, in which the Lord tells Arjuna not to hesitate or fear. Instead of worrying, he should just surrender. And according to that level of surrender, he will receive reciprocation. Next time you find yourself in a state of complete anxiety, consider these factors and allow them to remind you that such worry actually minimizes God's position as the ultimate controller and our well-wisher. In actuality, it actually denies these facts and takes the place of higher devotion and love. So next time you find yourself in a state of complete anxiety, consider these factors and realize that worry actually minimizes God's position as the ultimate controller. Introspection is the next section. Are there any questions so far? Introspection. I know there aren't too many worriers out there or over excessive anxious folks, but listen, because I'm sure you know somebody who is a worrier or is going through excessive anxiety. And this is the role of the spiritual warrior, to gain knowledge and understanding to help others, so that we can make our environment a place of harmony and peace and bliss as we develop more in our spiritual self to reach the ultimate goal of life, which is loving God and to return to the spiritual kingdom. We should use this opportunity to look at our mind in order to harness it and place it more in the service of the Lord. First, we should look at ourselves to determine the extent that excessive worry permeates our lives. You see, again and throughout the past reading, we must do introspection. We must look at ourselves within ourselves in an honest way. Many people spend their time pointing, your fault, you didn't do this, but we have to first examine our own minds and thought patterns and what we're allowing to permeate our lives. He says this examination will tell us about our level of faith. A sadhu or saintly person is supposed to be Dirda Vrata, or faithful with firm determination and very grave and focused. What does this tell us about our own mindset? Grave and focused, faithful with firm determination. Ask yourself those questions. Examine what is going on within your mind. He continues, by engaging in deep introspection, many people will discover that worries and anxieties thoroughly permeate their day. How much time do you spend worrying and being anxious about what? But he's saying many people, if you take the time for this introspection and self-examination, take the time, it's important, you will discover that worries and anxieties thoroughly permeate your day-to-day activities. Such anxieties often revolve around physical and economic problems. You notice I raised my voice. I didn't have to do that, right? We know what's going on in the world today and what we're hearing in the media and reading in the newspapers. Or stem from all types of insignificant matters. For instance, people meditate on what to wear, where to go over the weekend, what to do after they choose a place, and what other people think of them. That rings a bell, I'm sure. So much time we spend about what other people are going to think about us, or what we're wearing, or what hairdo we have. Such excessive anxiety are solely on the bodily platform and revolve around the individual as the center of the universe. And as a spiritualist, Where is your thoughts to be? Where is your mind to be? On what level? Definitely not the bodily, right? On our spiritual self. He told us throughout our reading, we are spiritual beings. We are eternal beings. Reinforcing the spirituality of ourselves. Because that's why we're spiritual warriors here, endeavoring to grow and to help others. Too much worrying puts an excessive amount of emphasis on our bodies and on matter. A devotee should not remain in this mood. The Supreme Lord makes very strong proposition by telling us not to hesitate, fear, or worry. That's the Lord himself speaking. In spite of the constant assaults against us in the material energy, he tells us to give up our fears and anxiety. Do you have that faith? Do you have that trust to do that? The author says, we will offer 4 different categories with which to broaden our analysis. We will define worry, offer practical techniques to help us address the problem, look closer at certain scriptural references relating to this topic, and finally, hear about the characteristics of some of the outstanding personalities in the scriptures who did not engage in excessive worry. Does that sound exciting? Are you ready to go on this adventure? He's going to offer us many things to help. One thing about the author, he tells us what the problem is, and then he goes on to offer techniques, methods, tools, technologies to get ourselves out. That's why introspection, self-examination is so important. So I hope you've got pen and paper, if you're interested in what you're hearing, to maybe just make a note or make a note. And I'm going to take a drink of water. While you get your paper and pen, I'm going to take a little drink of water. Excuse me. All right, ready? What is anxiety? The author says, we can define worry in the following ways. Number 1, worry is a choice and is often a way to avoid change. We sometimes take shelter of worry because it helps us feel busy and allows us to rationalize our lack of concrete action. Whoa. Wait a minute. Worry is a choice. Nobody's making you worry. You choose. And it's often a way to avoid change. And change is inevitable. Every moment something is changing. All right. He says we sometimes take shelter of worry because it helps us feel busy and allows us to rationalize what? Our lack of concrete action. Instead of taking the proper action, we accept the illusion of activity that anxiety produces. Oh, wow. Number 2, worry is also a poor substitute for proper loving action. It is an artificial activity that we use to minimize the proper and beneficial action. As a result, we just worry. Since we spend so much time worrying, we have less time to actively glorify the Lord. If we place all of our mental and physical energy into worrying, we will not have a sufficient amount left to repose in God. Oh, wow. And what did we just read? What does God tell Arjuna? Engage your mind always in thinking of me. Become my devotee. Offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. If you are endeavoring to act on those instructions, but you're worrying, you won't have time to do that. Wow, you don't worry. That means if you're doing that and you want to follow that, you start working on that and the worry won't be there. Wow. Number 3, excessive worry basically deals with a feeling of powerlessness. Sadhus or saints should not be arrogant or egocentric, but very humble. Although they recognize their own lack of power, they understand that the Lord has the ability to accomplish all tasks. They understand that the Lord has the ability to accomplish all tasks. Consequently, by letting the power of Shakti or Shakti of the Lord work through them, they have access to great power. Actually, excessive anxiety disempowers us and prevents us from allowing God's power to work through us because we have blocked the power. What just came to mind, it's that whole thing, I think even do the election time, was yes we can. It was putting out a positive energy and a positive thought. And if you begin to worry about something and you're worrying, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't, you're not connecting with, as he says here, the power of God, which is able to accomplish all tasks. There was a saying just went through my mind. All things are possible to him, her, who believes in God. I think that's in the scripture. Okay, number 4. Worrying is a way to rehearse dreadful outcomes. Worrying is a way to rehearse dreadful outcomes. In other words, it creates some of the same effects or feelings that would result from the negative outcome itself. If we analyze the results closely, worry leads to the exact outcome that we most want to avoid. since you have practically lived the trauma or misfortune in the mind, you may even experience some of the negative effects. Have you had this experience with someone? I have. They would be talking about something they want to do or someplace they want to go or some action, and then they'd say, but what if? I don't think I can do that. I can't afford it. I won't have anything to it. And then when the time comes, it doesn't happen. They don't have something to wear, or the prices went up and they couldn't. And they'll say, I told you that. I told you what happened. But that's, he's saying here, if you have lived the trauma or misfortune in your mind, you may even experience some of the negative effects. And I'm sure all of you out there have seen situations like this or been through that. He says, if you continue to meditate on this mantra, not only will you mentally experience the situation, you may even turn it into a physical experience. 5. Abandoning worry, Masucha, the Lord said to Arjuna, does not mean that we stop planning. You don't just sit there and say, oh well, I'm not going to worry, God will do it. We should not give up our concern when we see an improper action. Rather, we should plan, think powerfully, and then do the necessary. What do you do if you discover a fire in the house? You immediately leave. You get out of there, right? You would not just sit on the couch and worry. Obviously, there is a problem, but it is also a time for practical action. And what comes to me with that practice is why you've been listening to his words of knowing the connection with God, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and know that he's the controller, and knowing that he has the power. And as he said here, let that power work through you. You will take that action, and you will take it in trust rather than fear. Now, before we close, we have another wonderful section and something to meditate on for the week. I'd like whoever you are out there listening, and hopefully, I'm hoping you're making notes. If you're not, it's okay. You may have a young, energetic, what do they call that, when you grasp everything and can hold on to it, photogenic mind. But to see how your week of activity, actions, words, and thoughts are going based on what you have heard. The next section is called How to Avoid Anxiety. All right, I know everybody's waiting for that. You're perked up, sitting up straight. How do I avoid this anxiety? Okay, he says, how do we break this pattern of constantly worrying? Yeah, tell me, right? How can people who have the protection of the greatest shelter still worry so much? That's a good one. How can people who have the protection of the greatest shelter, the Lord himself, still worry so much? Although we can endlessly worry and consider ourselves to be at the mercy of circumstances, we understand the influence of karma, which refers to any material action that brings a reaction, binding us to this material world. What's that phrase? What goes around comes around. Huh? You know about that. We also understand that higher authorities, the devas, the angelic hosts, and the Supreme Lord have control over all things. To the extent that we genuinely surrender, Krishna has the duty to protect and fulfill his part. So he's saying, to the extent that you genuinely surrender, let go your fears and your doubts, the Lord has the duty to protect and fulfill his part, which is to care for his devotees, protect his devotees. Considering these factors, where does all the worry stem from? Does it mean that we think of the Lord as a liar or a cheater who wants to see us in constant fear and to use us in unhealthy ways in his position as an autocrat? Does it mean that we only think of God as the controller who wants to keep us in the material prison? If we consider the sweetness of the divine couple or Mother, Father, God, and we consider how the Lord monitors every action and thought, our level of anxiety should never escalate to such an extent that we do not feel backed or protected when we act righteously. Get that? When we act righteously, what goes around comes around. The sweetness, he says, if we consider the sweetness of Mother, Father, God, and we consider how the Lord monitors every action and thought, the presence of God is everywhere, from in our hearts, every flower, every cloud, everywhere. It's everywhere. You can't escape. But if you accept this, understand this, live your life like that, then your level of anxiety should never escalate to such an extent that we never feel backed or protected. We want to find ways to break the worry habits before they break us. If we do not stop such habits, our fears can easily overwhelm us and even turn into chronic depression, phobias, panic attacks, compulsive behavior, and even suicide. We have all seen people who worry about every little detail. That's not us. We're spiritual warriors. We're hearing and understanding how the mind works, and we're mastering the mind. And we're being humbled. Those 12 qualities of a spiritual warrior. you work with those on a daily basis, then we won't have worry. We won't worry about every little detail. You'll know who's the controller. You'll know who's your protector. If we simply present them with an idea, they will immediately try to show its fallibility. Fallibility. They have an insecure complex along with an existential mood about life. They feel defeated before they even start. You know people like that, huh? Such people may even pull out memories from the past and then present these past failures as evidence. But they will not plan or depend on God. Since they will not take the risk, they lead a life of great boredom, frustration, mediocrity, which also means less spiritual taste. We do not want to fall into these destructive patterns. Therefore, we want to offer the following techniques to help rescue our consciousness from such a negative mentality. And guess what? I'm going to stop now and save these techniques for next week. And from what we've gone through, if you've been listening, if you're desiring a stronger spiritual life, and if you've heard anything that can help you want to change some patterns, I would suggest you write them down, make notes. In fact, if you come back next week, I'd like to hear. So I'll stop now and ask if there are any questions. I'm just intrigued by what I've read it before, but each time I read it and hear it, it makes me more determined to become a stronger spiritual warrior and be able to hear these and implement the positiveness in my life and get rid of the negative. Are there any questions or comments?
Yes, there's a question from Bhuvan Rohan.
Okay.
He says, if we shouldn't worry just, he wants to know if we shouldn't worry just a little about some things in the material arena, or if we should just live in expectation of everything falling together on its own if we're good enough devotees.
There has to be an action, Prabhu. Worry, what he's talking here is excessive worry and excessive anxiety. And he's given us the understanding, if you are an introspective person, you will know you're beginning to worry, or you can feel the worry coming. But as we read, if you study, you can look to see if that worry is a way to avoid change. You can question, why did you choose worry? I'm reading now from What is Anxiety. Worry is a choice. He says also, if you can examine and see if your worry is a substitute for proper loving action. You can check if are you worried about feeling powerless then you take time to examine your spiritual life, your thinking. Because as he mentioned here a number of times, if we know who the controller is, based on what he has said to Arjuna from the readings. So if you find yourself worrying, it's a good time to take some action based on a higher thinking, an examination of what the worry is. So it does mean to take an action. He says here, abandoning worry does not mean we stop planning. We should not give up our concern when we see an improper action. Rather, we should plan, think powerfully, and then do the necessary. What do you do if your house is on fire? You get the heck out of there, right? As he says, you don't sit on the couch and worry. So if it's a worry, yes. It isn't that you just sit there, worry. There's some action to be taken. And as you gain knowledge of who you are as a spiritual being, an eternal being, of who God is, and your well-wisher, your protector, the most powerful, you can then begin planning and take some action. Hopefully that's helpful.
Artie asks, how can we plan?
Artie, welcome back. I've been planning to write to you. Hopefully I'll make the time. How can you plan? How can you plan what? You have to use your mind, use your intelligence. You have to see what is the concern that you want to stop worrying about. It's really, as he said here, that introspective. And you use paper and pen. I like to write. Journal, if you will. And write what you would like to happen or what you would like to see in your life. And once you write what you'd like, you can then write how do you get to do that, and take step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's planning. Now, a joke, something comes to my mind. First, before I tell you this joke, in doing this, there needs to be, as he has been telling us, the connection of you as a spirit soul with the supreme personality of Godhead, and knowing your connectedness with this Lord, this God, this supreme, and trusting that, so you can make your plan, and the Lord in the heart will guide you. Talk to him as your best friend. But what had just come up, I've been hearing this, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. But that doesn't mean, I like that, I don't know about you, but that doesn't mean you stop planning. It means you plan, but with a higher desire, state of consciousness. So Artie, you just put a plan down, step by step, to see what it is you're worrying about and what will help you to stop worrying about that, and what action you can take. Because he says here, abandoning worry does not mean we stop planning. We should not give up our concern when we see an improper action. Rather, we should plan, think powerfully, and then do the necessary. Okay? What do you do if you discover your house is on fire? You get up and get out. Right? You don't sit on the couch, as he said, and worry. So there will be problems. There will be challenges. We're in the material body, in this material world, and we have to have challenges so we can take action and develop our consciousness and know who we are and who we're connected with, and see how the Lord is backing us up and helping us. Okay? Any other questions?
Yes, there's 2 more questions from Bhuvan Mohan. He says, thank you, Mother Indrani. Then planning is just constructive worrying?
Planning is constructive worrying. Constructive worrying. It's constructive action which will displace the worry. Okay?
The second question is, does the knowledge of connectedness change an ordinary worry into a plan?
Say that again.
Does the knowledge of connectedness change an ordinary worry into a plan?
The connectedness. If you have the connectedness, you'll make your plan without worry. And what connectedness, maybe let's get on the same page here. Your connectedness with God, your knowing who you are as part and parcel of God, and knowing that God is your protector, your well-wisher, all the wonderful things we've said here, that He's all-powerful, and if you let Him work through you, you can take an action. So your connectedness will allow you not to worry. Stop the worry and begin planning. He said, abandoning worry does not mean we stop planning. And you wouldn't, if you were connected. We go back to where we read earlier, and you've done your introspection and self-examination, you will see the worry, you'll look at it and realize for a moment you forgot. For a moment you forgot your connectedness, you forgot the faith you had in the whole that you were connected with, and you bring yourself back. And when you bring yourself back, you are able to take an action because you become reconnected. You take an action knowing who's got your back, who's present for you. Huh? I hope that answers.
He says, yes, thank you, Mother Indrani. I now see the difference.
Who's
Krishna.
that?
Bhuvan
Mahan. All right. Thank you for your questions. Any other questions? Concerns? No? Okay. So everybody's going to do introspection. Know now how to avoid anxiety. And be waiting next week. Prayerfully, we'll all be here so that we can work on avoiding. And to find out ways to break the worry habit. And the first one, I'm going to give you a hint. One of them is, do not fear the future. End of class. Hare Krishna. Thank you, spiritual warriors. And I hope this is helping us all to become stronger and less worriers and less anxious. And I'm talking to myself about that. Thank you for being there. Hare Krishna.